do just a little test recording. Could you say your name one more time, please?
Todd Shurn.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so it is March 1st, and my name is Christy Lapuma. I'm here with Mr. Todd Shurn. We are at the closing reception for the DC Commission of the Arts and Humanities exhibition Legacy, the Civil Rights at 60. And Mr. Shurn has agreed to speak with us for a few minutes to tell us a little bit of his own story, especially how it's related to civic action. Do I have your permission to record today?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. So we wanted to start out by asking just if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your early memories with civic action.
All right, so just as a level set, I have a PhD in computer science. I was the first black graduate to get an engineering PhD from Southern Methodist University in Dallas. I've been on the faculty in computer science at Howard University since 1993. I've also worked with the University of Southern California, Carnegie Mellon, the University of Michigan, and I have a project ongoing with MIT faculty related to AI and distracted driving.
Wow, so you've been around in this field. And has most of your work been based in DC and then traveling to work in different places?
Yes.
Okay, DC's
For the last 30 years.
For the last 30 years.
Prior to that, I lived in Dallas.
You lived in Dallas.
And I lived in Houston prior to that, and I was an engineer for the space shuttle. So,
Really?
yes, I was a contractor with IBM, and we had responsibility for the space shuttle operating system. It was called FCOS, Flight Computer Operating System. So I was software verification and assurance.
Wow. So in terms of like technology and engineering, computer science, do you see those as related to civic action through your experiences? Or how?
Well, I am very appreciative of those kinds of actions because provide an opportunity for me. As I mentioned, Southern Methodist University in Dallas is not a place that's really looking for diversity, even now. And certainly 30 years ago, they weren't either. But because of the actions that people had taken, there was opportunity for me. And so I'm very much appreciative of that. And I've tried to do my best to take advantage of the opportunity that these people that are being honored at 60 created for someone like me.
Yes, so you see that action as opening doors and as kind of paving a path.
Totally, and as a data point, the first black graduate of SMU was 1970, which is that's crazy.
Yeah.
But that's Dallas. There was no pressure for black folks to go to SMU, and then you're in Texas, so at that point, they want you to go to Bishop College or to Prairie View or to one of the HBCUs in Texas. Mm-hmm. And so the notion that a Negro would go to SMU was not even something that they even considered. And it wasn't until, as I said, 1970, and the impetus was obviously athletics, because SMU did play at a high level, and they were getting their hat handed to them by teams that were integrated, and so that was the motivation for them to bring black students to SMU finally.
Wow, that's amazing how that whole education system is either denied or predicated on that.
Yes, it was completely, and there was, I think, there were some strong advocates in Dallas for there to be action, and so at least they were sensitive to the need. And in my case, I just did what I needed to do. But there was a recognition at SMU, which is extremely conservative and extremely rich, that something needed to be done. And it's because of what we're here to honor today.
Yes, thank you. That's a beautiful introduction to us. No problem. I'll let them close the door so it doesn't get on our recording. Okay. I'm an educator myself, so I really appreciate hearing stories of all the fights for being able to attain an open education across the country. It's like a basic human right, in my opinion. I don't know if, like, from what you say, it sounds like there were, like, you saw people as taking civic action that kind of prepared the terrain for you to be able to achieve your achievements. Did you get to participate in any protest at any point? Do you remember?
Well, there were things, back then, but, I was really kind of focused. I was focused on what I was doing.
Right.
And so, again, as I said, as a result of what they did, there were some support groups that were established, like, NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. And not only were they established, but they were funded, right, which allowed people to, gain the preparation they need. And then the backstory, which shouldn't be diminished or dismissed, was yes, I did get my PhD from SMU, and yes, I was the first Black graduate of engineering with a PhD, but I got my bachelor's and my master's from the University of Michigan. Yeah, so that was an unfair advantage, because when I went to SMU, obviously SMU is in Michigan, so at that point, I was one of the best students at SMU.
Right.
I mean, I won Student of the Year and all these things.
You were rocking it.
Yeah, I was, and it was because I had gone to Michigan. I went to Michigan undergrad, and I got my master's at Michigan. So by the time I got to SMU, it was like, come on.
Yeah, so you had that advantage.
Yeah, I did have an advantage.
But I mean, like you said, then that paves the way for other people.
And the reason why, Michigan was able to prepare Black students, not just myself, is because, again, of this legacy, right? Michigan had a lot of support that SMU never had, right? They had, minority lounges, and they had minority advisors, and they had minority tutoring systems. And so all of the nurturing resources that were needed to complete the engineering curriculum at Michigan were provided to those who sought them.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the level set, which made SMU possible.
How did you end up in Michigan coming from Texas?
No. I'm from Chicago.
Oh, you're from Chicago.
Yes.
You were in Texas for your studies that you're
doing. Yeah, so I went to Michigan, got my bachelor's and master's from Michigan. Then I went to Houston for Johnson Space Center, worked for IBM as a contractor, and then I left IBM, took a leave of absence from there, moved from Houston to Dallas to attend SMU, graduated from SMU, and then moved to DC, and then been on the faculty at Howard ever since.
Got it. Amazing. Those are three really different places. Like the Midwest, like Michigan's not that far from Chicago. It's right
there.
Same, right then. Then you're in Texas, and then you come to DC.
Yes.
What does it mean to you? You've been 30 years in DC, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to you to live in the nation's capital, where so many of these huge protests have happened?
Well, I was accosted by the park police for the Black Lives Matter protest. I bicycling enthusiast, and I have a route that took me around the White House and on the National Mall. So when the protests were occurring, this was, when Trump was president, I was just out riding my bike, and so I stopped for the protest, right? So I just went down and no problems. And then all of a sudden, they started tear gassing me, not just me, the whole crowd, and they were like beating people, and it was just really, really a crazy scene. And so they kind of cowherded us from where we were just by Lafayette Park all the way to the other side of K Street. And so I had no idea what was going on. None of us did. And then finally someone called me and said, hey, Trump is standing out there with a Bible upside down. And I'm like, what? So then I pulled up CNN on my phone, and I saw him, and I was like, wow. So I had tear gas and all kind of stuff. So you can believe.
That's horrible.
Yeah, so you can believe I sued the what out of the National Park Service. And we're in talks now, but they're selling. I mean, they're offering cash, right? Because I completed the forms and all the things, and I showed them pictures of what happened and what made it worse. And I take some responsibility, because This was during COVID, and so I had a KN95 mask, and engineer. So me being an engineer, when they sprayed the canister of tear gas, I'm like, hey, I got a mask on. That's not gonna hurt me. And so they like, oh, won't hurt you. So they hit me again.
No.
Okay, yeah, they did, because I was like, I'm like, I'm ready, right? And so they just, and then it became a really difficult scene for me. So I was coughing and all kind of stuff. Yeah, It was really bad. It was really bad. So, and then I was on my bicycle, and I had to ride home, and it was just a bad scene. And so I was if it hadn't been during COVID, I would have gone to the emergency room. But because it was during COVID, I can't. That's the last place I wanted to go. And so I called them, and they kind of told me what to do, and I did some of the things that they said to do. But I had a very difficult night because I think because I had the KN95 mask on, I probably asked for a little bit of extra tear gas, but I wasn't doing anything. All I was doing was standing there with my bike on the fence, and in fact, I was talking to folks, and I was admiring how peaceful it was. I don't know if you were aware, but there was no warning, nothing. You could have brought a kid down there. There was no problem. All kinds of people, black people, white people, Asian. I mean, there was nothing. And there was no warning on what was going to happen. And so then all of a sudden, here they come with I'm regular, so these are like the biggest horses I've ever seen in my life. These are, I don't know if you've seen the park police horses, but they're huge.
They're scary.
Yeah, and so they came, and the park police horses had the gas mask on, right? The horses had, because they were popping tear gas canisters. So the horses would be affected by that as well. So they had gas masks on the horses, and they were literally, they were beating people, and because they had, the nightsticks and all that. So I was involved with the ACLU, and all the things that occurred from that, because I was like right there. I was on the corner of basically right where 16th ends at Lafayette Park, right? It dead ends right there, right? That's right where I was, and so I was almost, I would say I was about 200 feet from the church, and the spot where Trump was holding the Bible upside down. Yeah, I was right there. And so they just cleared us all out, and they didn't tell any of us why. And it was a real violent action that it took to clean out that area. And so then obviously when we found out, and then I'm coughing and wheezing the whole time, and then I found out why, then I was like ticked. So aside from not feeling well, I had, some anger that had built up.
You were going to take your legal action.
Oh, I did.
And complete it all.
No doubt.
Complete it all.
So so like I said, they've already offered cash on this, and it's just a question of how much. And part of the issue is that if I take the cash, then I can't sue them. Yeah, so they're buying me off.
Right. That's how they do.
Yeah, that's how they do.
Yeah.
And so we're negotiating, because I'm going to take the cash, because I'm not going to, but it's just like, let's just get that number where I'm happy, and then we're going to settle.
Do they allow you to still speak on it? Or
Yeah,
do they make you
okay. Because I haven't taken the cash.
Right.
And I'm not suing them, so because I'm kind of in this advanced position, because they made the offer, and I've acknowledged the offer, but I haven't accepted it. And so even when I accept the offer, I can still speak on it. I just won't have any legal remedy.
I imagine there could be like class actions in that same vein. I was down there many of those days, and it was horrible.
Right. So there is class action, and I was a part of that. But I had to, again, they're separating you. So I was part of the ACL class action. But if I take the settlement, then that just pulls me out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that's an important form of civic action. Being able to stand up for your rights, but also just being able to ride your bike down the street.
And this was my normal route. So that's why when I sent the materials in, I had like a phone app that tracks my route. And so I had been doing this for days and days. This is what I did. Okay, so then I'm like, okay, this is what I normally do. And if you look, I had been down there previously too. This wasn't the first day that I had stopped at the Black Lives Matter protest. I had been down there almost every day, because that's the route that I take on my bike. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was just that particular day. I think it was like June 1st. So it was just that particular day. But I was there like May 31st, May 30th,
Yep.
and then even today, not today, but in the future, because that's my route. So.
Right. Yeah. So going about your everyday business.
Yeah, I was just going about my everyday business, but I did come to the Black Lives Matter. I wouldn't even call it a protest. It was just a kind of a visibility issue. I mean, it was so peaceful. I mean, I don't know if you were there.
I was there the 30th, 31st.
It was so peaceful. It's like there was no problem at all. They say, don't start with none, won't be none. There wasn't anything. In fact, I had been telling people, I'm like, this is like the most peaceful situation in the world. I mean, people playing music. I mean, there was just nothing there. And the reality is that whole situation was provoked by Trump. Because if he wouldn't have done what he did, none of this would have occurred.
Yeah. And that was a really specific historical moment, too, because of COVID, like you say, and everything.
Yes.
What about in your time at Howard? Have there been any other protests or civic actions that you can remember?
So I'm kind of on the other side of the fence on that, in the sense that there were some things, but my students have to come to class, and their assignments are still due. So that's when I was trying to decide how I should respond, I talked to some faculty at Berkeley, and they were like, okay, with all the movement at Berkeley, no, your assignments are still due. Your exams are still due. Everything moves forward. So my interaction with the students was, that's great, but that doesn't resolve, any class issues.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I'll let you get that.
Yeah. Yeah. So they have to. They still have to complete their assignments, and that's not an excuse.
Yeah.
It's like we're moving forward here, so it's not like, okay, well, I submitted my code, and then the other student says, well, I didn't submit my code, but I was protesting. No, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, that was such a specific moment where those conversations were happening a lot.
Yeah. So for me, as a computer science instructor and an engineer, I support, but everyone has to prioritize their time, and so that was my perspective on it.
Thank you for sharing that. And students have been at the front of a lot of civic action movements in the past and the present. I wonder if there's a figure, student or not, that you remember from some of the civic actions historically that you remember their name or kind of have a heroic reputation of sorts within this legacy. Is there anyone that comes to mind?
So there are, but they're not national.
Yeah. Who do you think about?
I think about there's a guy named James Lee. He was there was a called Black Action Movement at the University of Michigan, and he was the one. This was in '68, but he pushed and pushed and pushed, and so he got the university to create. We had a William Monroe Charter House. We had a lot of other things that resulted. It's called BAM. It was like the BAM movement. So it was when I was at the University of Michigan, it happened in the late '60s, like '68. So I got there. I got there in '78. But when I got there, because of them, I believe the guy's name is James Lee. Because of what he did, again, that's where all these things were in place, from the dorms to the lounges to the tutoring facilities. All these things resulted from the Black Action Movement that happened at U of M in the '70s, or late '60s, early '70s. And there was a kind of a similar action that happened at other Big Ten schools. So at Northwestern, at Ohio State, at Michigan State, there were some things right in that same time frame that provided resources and opportunity. So again, very indebted to him and those in that group, because they created a infrastructure that we were able to leverage.
Yes. How did you learn about him? Do you remember? Was it word of mouth? People passed it down?
Yeah, no. People at University of Michigan were very appreciative right? Like, so, it might seem like a insignificant thing, but in my generation, if you say BAM, I mean, everybody is like, wow, okay. Because it's almost like at University of Michigan, it was like pre-BAM and post-BAM, right? And pre-BAM was SMU, okay? And then post-BAM was what I experienced. And they still haven't had a BAM at SMU.
Right. Yeah, that's what a legacy is, when people say it's pre and post.
Yes,
right?
and so it was very stark and very significant. And so in terms of impact, that was the impact. And then, being from Chicago, I mean, I know Jesse Jackson, I know his kids. We grew up, so, I'm familiar with all that Operation Push. I'm friends with them, so I just go in and whatever.
I love that. When you think about the future, what do you see as like the future of the civil rights movement or future of civil rights? Like what issues and questions do you imagine will shape this next generation?
So I probably like most people now, when you kind of look forward, civil rights are probably going to be in two areas. One of them is going to be climate change, because climate change is affecting people of color like you wouldn't believe, right? So there's areas that there are a lot of poor black people that live kind of on the lowlands, and they're about to get flooded out. And whether there's some places in Michigan that are adjacent to Lake Michigan, and they have like a public housing project, and then Lake Michigan is like, so this is the bank right here, and then this is the city where the black folks are. Lake Michigan is like right to the edge of the bank, and so you're like, okay, well, if Lake Michigan just rises not even a foot, like 6 inches, there's going to be a layer of water that is going to just wipe out this area. And it's interesting that the black people are in the low area and the white folks are up on the hill. So if Lake Michigan rises, it gets us first.
Yes.
Okay. So climate change is huge, and it's not just, whether it's in Louisiana, Florida, you can almost look at South Carolina. You can look at where a lot of black people or people of color live, and then look at where the water level is. Okay, and you're like, whoa. Okay, so that's the first one. Okay, then the second one is somewhat related to it, is going to be both water quality and food security. Okay, both of those are going to be huge, because you hear a lot about it with food deserts, but it's going to be worse than that, because there are other factors in the quality of food, just other than just its availability, right? It's like, okay, what is the nutritious value of it? Are there some long-term contaminants in it, right? Is there lead in it from what's happened in the past? And then in addition to those issues, kind of creating this toxic soup in some of these lower lying areas where a lot of black people live. Former industrial companies have contaminated both the ground, the water, and the air. So that's why you hear about black folks having asthmas, right? Because they're in these areas where there is industrial contamination. But it's not just in the air, it's in the ground, and it's also in the water. There were very few regulations. The EPA didn't come into existence until 1969. And so prior to that, they were just able to just dump whatever, wherever, and guess what? Where do you think they dumped it?
Of course.
And so that is really an issue, because we're living on top of like these toxic areas. And so as we go forward, and more those toxins, the half-life on that stuff is really long. So those toxins are still there, the arsenic, the mercury, those kinds of things, they're in both the water and the soil. And it's not, unless you intentionally address it, it doesn't get better on its own, because these things don't break down quickly. They break down over like hundreds of years, right? So as we go forward, there's going to be a lot of instances where people and particularly kids, have problems. And you even hear about it with lead in water. Well, that's just the beginning of it. That's the tip of the iceberg. So when you ask civil rights going forward, that is where I see there's going to be a lot of emphasis, because it's like, no. You have to address this contamination. And then where the racial component of it is okay, well, look where it is.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not, the contamination is in Gary. Okay, it's not in North Chicago. All right, and then look who lives in Gary. Okay, well, wait a minute. Okay, and look at the circle where the ground is contaminated, and then look at who lives right around it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How do you envision people making changes in that, in terms of like effective strategy, if you were to envision?
So they're going to have to be proactive. And so doing things like testing the water themselves, right? Testing the soil themselves. Because, you can't wait for EPA to do it, or the county to do it, or state to do it. Like, oh, well, they didn't tell us. Okay, well, hold it. You live there, okay? And they may not tell you, but it's your responsibility to make sure that you have, the best environment for your kids. So you can go, or you don't have to go anywhere now. You can order Amazon. pH paper is like super cheap, okay? And all you have to do is take the paper and stick it in water. So if you have water pooling up outside your house and you want to know if it's acidic, for less than $5, you can just get some pH paper and go, okay, and pull it out. And then you see, okay, and they'll give you a scale. And if it's acidic above a certain number, then you have a problem. Then you can start to address that problem. But if you don't proactively test, then you're going to be reacting to the implications of the contamination. And that's what happens so often. It's like, we don't test. And so because we don't test, then we come back and it's like, oops.
20 years later,
Mm-hmm.
after all the accumulated.
And so that, to me, in terms of all of those issues, whether it's so with climate change, you really, there's some actions you can take, but it's difficult to test for that. But the contamination is one you can test for. Food security is something that you can address. And so those issues are at least, I will say, I'm not going to say completely solvable, but their impact can be greatly reduced by community action, by communities taking responsibility, and certainly not waiting for the government. Because, waiting for the government got us to where we are now, right? And we got contamination everywhere. And a lot of people say they don't know, I didn't know, nobody told me. All right, well, they're not going to tell you. That's not the way it works. All right, the way it works is you got to do for you. And once you do for you and you say, all right, here are the numbers, here's the pH paper. Now, when you go and you protest, then you have not only the basis for the protest, but you also have the baseline or the benchmark for the action that you want to see, right? So you say, okay, we're way over the scale here. We're like, in the 9 to 10 range of acidity. Okay, you got to get this down between 7 and 7.5. All right, so that's what we're marching for. We're marching for, clean water, clean soil, all right, clean air. But we have measurements of where things are, and we have goals for where they should be. And so the civil rights movement is going to be to ensure that all people have a safe environment to live. And right now, there are a lot of people in this country that are living in environments that aren't safe, but they don't know, but they aren't.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about this. Is there anything else that when you think about civil rights that you would like to add?
No.
You said you grew up with Jesse Jackson.
I did.
His
kids.
His kids.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was normal, because, my life. That's what I'm from there, so it was not. It was just second nature, And there were a lot of protesters, and not just Jesse Jackson, but in Chicago from Farrakhan to Louis D. Even the big guy Elijah, okay, Muhammad. And so, all of those things, impacted me. I mean, from programs at the Mosque Number One on Stony Island. I don't know if you're familiar with Chicago, but the big national mosque is on Stony Island. That's Elijah Muhammad. And so all those things were just kind of part of my upbringing. And so again, it didn't make the impression that it made was that's just kind of part of life. And so the next corner over from my friends was like Jesse Jackson lived on Constance, and about maybe 3 or 4 houses down was Ramsey Lewis. I don't know if you know who Ramsey Lewis is, but Ramsey Lewis was a great jazz pianist. Okay. And then even down from them, there were some folks that were like telecasters like Wendell Phillips, who was on the on Channel 9. So in Chicago at that time, there were a lot of black people doing things. And then when I was in high school, that's when Harold Washington became the mayor. I don't know, you don't know, okay.
But I want to know.
Okay, so Harold Washington was the first black mayor of Chicago.
Okay. DC too, the first black mayor I think was named Washington.
It was.
Yeah,
first black mayor.
I try to learn my DC history,
Right.
but I love learning about Chicago history.
Yeah, so I can't recall the guy's name in DC, but yes, he was.
I know, I'm
It was
blanking too.
Walter.
You're right.
Walter E. Washington,
Yep.
because they named the convention center after him.
Yes, you're right.
That's the result of living in DC for 30 years.
There you go. I also have lived here for almost my whole life, so I should know that.
Yeah.
So you said you remember in high school when he came into power as the mayor.
Yeah. Harold Washington, he was called the Hisner. He came into power, and it was somewhat contentious. The woman, her name was Jane Byrne, and she was the first female mayor of Chicago. And Jane Byrne succeeded her. The person before her was named Michael Bilandic, and then the person before Bilandic was Richard J. Daley. You don't know who Mayor Daley was. Like, Mayor Daley was mayor of Chicago for like 20 some years.
Oh, really?
Well, he was the one in '68. I don't know if you recall, or if you've heard, like when the Democratic National Convention was in Chicago, and he unleashed the Chicago police on the protesters.
Of course.
Yes. Yeah. So that was Mayor Daley. And then his son later on, Richard M. Daley, became mayor, right? So Richard M. Daley was mayor at least for, maybe he was mayor for almost 20 years, I would say, at least 15 or 16 years.
Really? That
was his son. But in between the two Daleys were, Harold Washington, and Harold Washington actually died in office.
Really?
Yeah, it was a really sad day. Remember it, like, they're like he died. And the thing that Harold Washington did was, when he was first elected, he had a strong black support base, which was the South Side and the West Side. But the Gold Coast on the North Side, they were resistive to that, right? They don't, we got this Negro coming in and blah, blah, blah. And then as he demonstrated his competence, he won re-election by, I think he might have won it by the greatest margin ever. Because, white folks want the same thing that black folks want. They want their garbage picked up. They want their streets clean. Okay, and Harold Washington made Chicago work. I mean, he kept, when it snowed, he cleaned the snow. The garbage sanitation workers came by and were regularly collecting the garbage. So people felt really good about city services. And so his reelection was a breeze, and he was like super popular all over the city. And then he died. Wow. I don't even know if he lived a year after his reelection.
So for you, that was also like a really important figure.
Totally.
Somebody who was doing right by the people.
Oh, totally. Harold Washington. Oh yeah, he was a hero. I mean, Harold Washington. I mean, again, like, these aren't the national folks, but Harold Washington was, from my point of view, the man.
Super important.
Yeah, Harold Washington was the man. So, we call him the Hizener because he.
Why?
I don't know. I was young at the time.
That's wonderful to hear. I think local heroes are sometimes the most important to us because we get to see up close and personal their impact. And we feel it too.
Yeah. So he, he's one, and again, there's a rack of preachers out there who have kind of led, and one of the things that being a preacher, when you have a congregation, that gives you a degree of independence, right? Because you're not doing that 9-to-5 thing on somebody else's dime,
Mm-hmm.
and so you can kind of say and do what you need to, and so all over the North, whether it's Chicago or Detroit or St. Louis or Cleveland, there've always been local Black leaders that created some value. I know again. His name was, I want to say, Richard Stokes, I believe. He was the first Black mayor of Gary, and he did a lot of stuff. So these are all people that were kind of in my generation. They weren't my generation, they were the generation, but they were my parents, but I was very familiar with their actions. And again, as I said, even with Jesse, you can look at Jesse, all right, and Jesse did his thing, but look what his kids do. All of them went to college. Okay, all of them are very accomplished, right? And so that was that whole mindset. It's like, okay, well, we're pushing, these issues, but we're moving us forward both from an education point of view and from an economic point of view. So Jesse was very, he was very focused on economic opportunity, and in Chicago we had a Black business class. We had being local, but we had things like Chicago Defender, okay, and then Ebony and Jet magazine.
Of course.
Okay, and all these were Chicago based, and then we had.
Yes.
Hi.
We are still finishing up. Did you have?
Yeah, she'll be in the lobby.
Okay.
And we had a lot of Black hair care product manufacturers. So we had like Soft Sheen, Johnson Products. So there's Johnson Publishing Company, which was Ebony and Jet, and then there was Johnson Products, which was the hair, right? So we had all those things. And so again, we had restaurants, we had nightclubs, and so we kind of had our own economy in Chicago that was Black and was thriving. And my uncle, my father's brother, owned a pharmacy on the corner of 63rd and Cottage Grove. And what he did is he had a pharmacy, and then he had a number of doctors in his building. So he owned the building and owned the pharmacy, and then he leased space to doctors. And so, I grew up in that. And so I saw my uncle take care of business. My uncle was a businessman, but he was Black. And so, all of those things impacted me.
Yeah, and when you moved to DC, it was the 90s by then,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do you feel like you saw less of that in DC in your time there, or was it just because of maybe the way that you were coming in as associated with the university versus growing up in a neighborhood?
Yeah, and then I saw Marion Barry. I mean, I was at Howard, so Marion Barry was across the street, picking up girls or women. I mean, we see him. I mean, we come out and look at the McDonald's because the engineering building is right the kitty corner to the McDonald's on Georgia Avenue, and he'd have his limo parked right in front of McDonald's. And so even some of my friends now, I tease them. I'm like, okay, how many rides did you go on with Marion Barry? Because he had that limo. They're like, oh, I didn't get in there. Like, yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Wow, what an image.
Yeah. So Marion Barry was the mayor when I first came, and then I want to say Sharon Pratt, okay, and then there was Sharon Pratt, and then I think Marion Barry came back another term, and then after that, that's when
Just kept going.
Yeah. So in terms of DC action, it's I think localized, in terms of just specific issues like, okay, well, why is Ward 8, and the other wards, and then there's kind of the national issues, but I, really never participated in any civil action in DC except for the Black Lives Matter. That was the only one.
Yeah.
But I did. I was pretty true to the game because I did stop every time when I was riding my bike.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything you've shared today. Is there anything that you'd like to say as an outro?
That is just hopefully people will continue the legacy by being proactive and look to address directly, the problems that face our community. And as I said, climate change, food security, environment, those are at the top of the list. And so hopefully people will embrace that and own it and don't wait.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. I'm going to stop it now.